Hey, TIW Mafia, it's the Yeti. I want to take a minute here real quick and talk about today's podcast. Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo in your podcast. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co, and be sure to add our podcast in the How Did You Hear About Us Podgo section application.
What's up, TIW Mafia? JP here with Big Josh. We're chilling with another guest tonight. I think the last 2 weeks we've had sort of I wouldn't call him a younger wrestler, but a wrestler who is still current and really making a name for himself. And now we get a guy who made a name for himself and got out of wrestling, has written a book, and does some incredible yoga, like things that I couldn't imagine doing. And that's Mr. Knuckles Nelson, a.k.a. Brendan Higgins, as far as the book is concerned. How you doing tonight?
Oh, thanks for having me on tonight, guys. It's great to be here with you. I'm doing awesome.
And just to hit your credentials, 3-time NWA World Tag Champ?
3 times, yeah. 3 different partners.
That's how many people can say that? At least one?
Not many, and I can fact check that for sure.
So I was always an NWA New England fan, having grown up in Boston. Josh is like an NWA fan. He's up in Montana, so like everything he gets is on TV.
Oh, yeah, nice. Everything I consume is 2-dimensional.
Now, you were older when you got into wrestling, right? Not when you got into wrestling, but when you started, when you broke in.
I did. Like when I was a kid, I was obsessed with wrestling. Like I'm sure you guys were. It was like I loved all the sports. I'm a New England guy. I love the Celtics and the Patriots and the Red Sox and the Bruins. But wrestling was head and shoulders above everything. And as I got older and I became a teenager and into my 20s, it got so bad I had to start doing it.
Out of respect, I didn't interrupt him and tell him we just lost half our audience because of those teams. So
I never have anybody on my side as far as sports.
Well, Josh, do they even have sports teams in Montana?
Yeah, here we go.
He's a Steelers fan.
Yeah, I'm a big time Steelers fan. So my submission to any Patriots fan is the fact that Ben Roethlisberger asked Tom Brady to have a signed jersey, and then he went ahead and hung it in his office. So that tells you where that's at.
Nice.
And that was a good Brady jersey. That was a Patriots jersey.
Jesus.
Now,
flip me some dish. I'll let you win. Flip me some dish, okay?
You were trained by Bob Evans and the late great Nick Steele.
Yeah, I was trained by Bob, Nick, and a guy named Brian Brieger, who was from Yankee Pro Wrestling, and he was the primary trainer. This was like in the early 90s, and a lot of people don't know the name Brian Brieger, but he did a lot of work as an extra and a jobber in WWF. Like if you remember the time that Papa Shango, the house lights came down, and when they came back up, his opponent's boots were on fire, and
okay.
That was Brian.
That was pretty cool. That's
awesome.
A little claim to fame. Now
and Brian also told us that they let him keep the boots.
When you say you were trained by 3 individuals, is that different styles? Just because of necessity? Like, how did that work for you as far as the training goes? Like when people talk about this and they look at Knuckles Nelson and they're like, okay, I'm going to research this guy. I want to understand. And when we talk about this, but we don't really touch on it, and this is one of those opportunities I think we can, because it's I guess it's different for me because these are old trainers and you're mentioning a name that people may not have heard before. So I just like to take the time to try and understand like different trainers out of necessity or just maturation, or how did that work for you?
Well, what happened was I started out in the very, very early stages at what would be considered a glorified backyard group. And they actually had a show one time, and a guy walked up to me after the show, and it was Bob Evans. And he said, I like what I just saw in the ring. If you want to ever become a trained professional wrestler and learn the art of pro wrestling, we have a school in Massachusetts. And that was my first my first time being in the right place at the right time, and that happened to me a lot over the years in wrestling. So I took Bob up on his offer, and we went up to Freetown, Massachusetts. It was called Coastal Pro Wrestling, and we went to the Coastal Pro Wrestling. Me and a friend of mine, his wrestling name was Clint Rampage. He really didn't wrestle that long, but when we got there, we went from this backyard group to a real professional wrestling school where guys were in the ring with boots and gear, and everybody knew what they were doing. And Bob Evans, of course, is going on to train lots and lots of people. But I was the first person that he ever trained, and it was Bob, Nick, and Brian, and Scott King, and these guys all came out of Yankee Pro Wrestling, where Gorgeous Chris Duffy and Phil Apollo and Dr. D. David Schultz and Tony Rumble. These guys were all down there training and helping get them, and they branched off from Yankee Pro. And so I would say everyone was teaching the same style. It wasn't like back then, it was just learning the art of pro wrestling. There wasn't all these different styles like that. I mean, wrestling, like every sport, has evolved. But back then, it was just learning to take bumps, conditioning, and get in the ring and start doing matches.
Do you have a feeling because you just sort of touched on it?
I'm going to try not to hog this, JP, tonight. I'm going to try and shut my mouth and let you ask questions until I feel like you're exhausted, and then I'm going to jump in because I'll continue to just talk all night long.
Do you have, do you still watch the current product?
I do.
Do you have feelings on how it's evolved? Because you just sort of touched on it, how there was, basically it was pro wrestling back then.
Right.
And now how it's evolved into, I hate saying sports entertainment, but sports entertainment because that's really what it is at this point.
Well, before the world changed, I was really getting into AEW. I was really enjoying what they were doing. But as far as the current state of wrestling goes, it just seems like a punch doesn't mean anything anymore. Like you could back a guy into the corner and give him a forearm across the back, and he would go down. Like a guy can get powerbombed 7 times, flip over the top rope, do this and that and this and that and this and that, and they kick out so much. It's just it's a whole different thing. I'm not complaining about it. I'm not putting it down. It's just it seems like it takes a lot to pin somebody nowadays.
Yeah, there's no more. I agree with you in that the finishing moves mean less, and like you said, a punch is absolutely nothing at this point.
I watched the match. I watched the match with Ric Flair in his debut in Madison Square Garden against Johnny Rodz, and he beat him with a vertical suplex.
That's
yeah. I was just watching WrestleMania 8, and I think that it was Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado. I miss the era that you were in NWA, the territories, and JP and I have been talking about this for a couple of years now, with AEW involving Impact and other promotions out there. Do you feel like professional wrestling and the fact that Chris Jericho and Stone Cold are going to be on a podcast together with WWE and AEW? Are we getting worked? Are we all getting worked just in the end? Is this kind of what this all is, and we all get a laugh at it? Or is this, WWF, WWE's never worked with talent in the past. Ever been open to bringing other talent. You were able to go to different territories, bring, correct me if I'm wrong, like the NWA, when they actually created the national championship belt, you were able to carry that to other territories, but you carried your own territory belt at the same time, right?
Yes.
Okay. Man, some of this stuff, JP, I still got it, man. Do you feel that validates, or does it devalue kind of those belts and those territories, like an AEW and an Impact? And if you don't want to touch on it, don't. But I really want to kind of pick your brain when it comes to that, because I love the idea. I love the expansion. I love the exposure for a lot of these kids that wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise to be on television and do a lot of stuff. Like John Silver is one of those kids. Yeah. Do you see that? I don't mean to ramble, but there's a question in there somewhere.
No, you covered a lot just then. And the first thing I'd like to comment on is when you said, "Are we being worked?" Kevin Sullivan told me in a locker room one time, if it's on TV and there's money involved, you're being worked. And so it's I've come to learn everybody's friends with everybody. There's no there's no doubt that WWE is in contact with AEW. There's no doubt. I remember being at TV tapings when they would have, this is back in the 90s, Raw would be on one screen at a WWE at Raw. There would be a monitor with Raw and a monitor with Nitro right there
Wow.
in the building. They'd be watching. It's so everyone. Everyone's, I don't want to say cahoots, but it's a big fraternity, even within the different companies. And I think crossing over and having all these interpromotional things is great for wrestling. It's great, and it also gives these smaller groups a little bit more momentum to like actually be considered not competition, but be considered another entity. Another something that's competing.
Right. And I guess, and JP, just to follow up, is that we've always kind of looked at it as a feeder program. You can kind of trace a trainer to a training program, to a promotion, to a belt, to a signing. And that's kind of what, I guess, the reason I asked that question is like New England is just, it's pro wrestling. It's always been pro wrestling. So what's your fondest memory of defending that belt? And the follow up to that is like, what's it like the day after when you lose a belt like that?
Well, when we got the my first run as NWA World Tag Team Champion was with Eric Sprazier, and it opened up doors like you wouldn't believe. Like we got to go to Japan, we got to go all over the country, to all the little NWA territories that were around back then. And it was, we would be in Pikeville, Kentucky one night, and in Ohio and West Virginia and Texas, and we'd be all over the place. And it was like, wow, this. And Jim Cornette was very instrumental in helping us set up loops and showing us, how to do that. And we dropped the belts the first time when we dropped the belt. I'll be perfectly honest with you, as a professional wrestler, the only time a wrestler loses is when he doesn't get paid. So it really didn't. It was no big deal losing a belt. Wild Bill Irwin told me one time the only thing that wrestling belts do is make your suitcase heavier.
Now, how but I understand that, and I understand pro wrestling is what it is. But how cool is it when you get the call that you're going to win that title? Not just the local independent, but the actual NWA World Tag Team title.
Well, I didn't believe it. I told Tony Rumble, we were driving down to New Jersey. It was me and him and Scott Dickinson in the car, and we're driving down there. I said, they're just trying to get us to come. They're not going to put the belts on us. It's not going to happen. Tully Blanchard and Tom Pritchard were in one corner, and I was like, they're not going to put us over, and they did. And they did, and we were at I forget where it was. It was in like a hotel ballroom, and JR was in the back scouting talent for this thing. It's surreal when I look back on it now. I was in the locker room with Missy Hyatt and Abdullah the Butcher and Ronnie Garvin, and all these guys were there, and it was and we walked back with the belts. We came back and we won the belts, and I remember the headbangers stopped us in the hallway, and they said, those are the nothing belts. Those belts don't mean anything, because they were, WWF, and they were like, they almost seemed like they were like jealous or something, because they had just won. They had just won those belts on WWF TV like a few months earlier. It was pretty wild. It was a really exciting and fun time.
There's a lot of validity to that statement, because I learned a long time ago, and a wise man once told me that the reason I dislike somebody or I say something is because I see something in that person or something that they have that I want or desire. So, I mean, that NWA tag team, having that, just knowing the founders that founded NWA and said that they never wanted to have a unification belt, and that they had a unification belt, and to be able to say that, you were that champion. That's one of those statements, and it's really cool to sit back and like when you Ronnie Garvin, like I haven't envisioned that guy for a long time, and when you bring up those names, it's pretty cool. It's like a Rolodex for me that it goes through, and it takes me back to like those childhood times when I watch those, and it's pretty cool when we get a chance to sit down with individuals like you, and you mention those names, and it clicks that memory.
And on top of those guys being in the match, that wasn't just like a regular NWA show, right?
That was actually the NWA's 50th anniversary, and it was supposed to be Tully Blanchard and Barry Windham, but for some reason Barry Windham didn't come, and they put Tom Pritchard in his place, and Tom Pritchard's Tom Pritchard. That was
Right.
it was a four corners match. There was a team called the Border Patrol out of the Carolinas, a team called Team Extreme from Texas, the Brotherhood from New England, and those guys. And I remember when Tom Pritchard got tagged into the match. It was him and Eric Frazier in the ring. Pritchard walked over and tagged me in. He hit me on the shoulder and tagged me in, and threw me a real curve because I didn't see that coming. So that would put me in the ring against my partner. And when Tom Pritchard did that, he laughed in my face. He laughed in my face, and he got out of the ring. And Tony Rumble's outside the ring screaming, "Pin him! Pin him!" He's telling me to pin my partner because then we'll win the belt.
No. You talked about a punch meaning something earlier, and I have a favorite weapon of mine that I've never got to use because you can't get them here. But can you tell us where the name Knuckles Nelson came from?
Oh man, my original wrestling name was Tully McShane. It was horrible. The Irish Prince, Tully McShane. Right? This is what I did before I met Tony Rumble. And
you got to tell us the name. How did Tully McShane come to fruition?
When I was mentioning the guys earlier from the wrestling school that I went to, we were all in the ring, and they were like, "We got to come up with a name for this guy." And they were throwing all these names around, and one of the guys said, "I got it, Tully McShane, the Irish Prince." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." I was really not attached to the name at all, but when I went to my first show for Tony Rumble, I just showed up. I didn't have any contacts. I drove in by myself in my car to Hanover, Massachusetts, and I found Tony, and he said, "I'm going to put you on the show tonight, but I'm going to put you under a mask, and if it goes well, I'll talk to you about future dates." So it went well. Actually, what happened was Tony gave me an elbow out of the corner, and he split my lip wide open. He didn't elbow me in the chest; he elbowed me right in the mouth. And I'm going to get to the name in a second, but this is a good story. And I was under a mask for the first time, and blood was all in my mouth. And when I got back to the locker room, I took the mask off of my face, and I was bloodied up like bad. And Tony Atlas walked up to me and put his face right up against mine and said, "That's good for the business, kid. Now go find Tony Rumble and tell him thank you for being in the ring with him." And that's exactly what I did. I did what I was told. And then after the show, the next day, Tony called me. "How's your mouth?" I said, "It's fine. I should have turned my head. It was my fault." And he said, "I got an idea for a wrestling character. It's like a bouncer, a rough and tumble guy out of Reno, Nevada called Knuckles Nelson." And the second he said it, I was like, "Oh, that sounds awesome." He said, "Do you want to give it a try?" I said, "Of course I do." And from that day on, I was Knuckles Nelson.
Now, was there brass knuckles involved with that?
Yeah, that was the whole premise of the gimmick. He would have me like in the ring with Snook, Tito Santana, Tom Brandy, like all these guys that were way more accomplished than me. And the match would end with Tony Rumble coming down to ringside, giving me a pair of brass knuckles. I would knock him out and pin him. I was beating all these guys that were like very established wrestlers. I remember Tony Atlas was not happy about losing to a clown like me. I was nobody, and he's Mr. USA Tony Atlas, and he did it, but he wasn't happy about it.
I remember, like I told you earlier, I grew up in Boston. I never went to the shows because my friends weren't into wrestling when we were teenagers. I was. I never grew out of that. I'm 47 years old, and I still haven't grown out of it to this day.
Join the
club. But I used to watch on Channel 23 in Boston on cable, and I can remember watching The Brotherhood with Tony, and you and Eric Frazier and Jason Rage and guys like that. And it's amazing to now look back and to be able to talk to you guys, because you guys were always just on TV to me, and it was like it wasn't just you guys. There was guys like Taz, Sabu. I got to see a lot of those guys, and then when my friends did get into ECW. How do you know this guy? Well, because I've been watching wrestling all along. You just started again because it got cool again.
Well, let me run down a few of the names that were in Tony Rumble's locker room when you were saying you like some of the name dropping. I mentioned Abdul the Butcher, Demolition Axe, Tony Atlas, Sergeant Slaughter, Jerry the King Lawler, Sabu, Tommy Dreamer, Vic Steamboat, Damian Demento, King Kong Bundy was there all the time. Tito Santana, like I would walk into locker rooms prior to Tony's shows, surrounded by independent guys that were all just trying to get on a show. Next thing you know, I'm in a lot. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was there a lot. And Jim Cornette and Kevin Sullivan were always there, scouting talent, promoting people to the next level on the spot, on the spot.
It's crazy, but yeah, because those guys were. Like you said, Kevin Kelly, like those guys were they were New England guys by all means.
Yeah, not Kevin Kelly, Kevin Sullivan from WCW.
Kevin Sullivan was definitely a New England guy, and
yeah.
definitely had the book at WCW at that time.
Right, and I remember one time Rick Fuller was in the ring, and he just powerbombed some poor soul, and he hit him so hard with his powerbomb, I thought he sent him through the mat. And Kevin Sullivan standing right next to me, and he goes, "Knuckles, who's the big guy?" I said, "That's Rick Fuller." He ran over to Tony. They talked for a minute. Rick Fuller came back, and they had a little conversation, and Fuller was on Monday Nitro the following Monday.
That's
how it happened. That's how it happened back then.
That's
what's funny is, and everybody always wants to blame like the money and this and that. It wasn't the money, it was the merger is what killed WCW with AOL. That's what killed it. It wasn't the fact that they had a huge bankroll and that they were paying people. AEW is going to prove that again. It was the fact that there was a merger and Time Warner and AOL got together and WCW just went away. That's the hard part.
I think their contract guys, I think what they were doing was they were outbidding WWE, and that hurt them. That definitely hurt them, I think, the money.
Yeah.
But that's outside looking in. What do I know about running
very
a business?
Outside looking in. Very outside looking in.
Yeah.
Like, I only read Eric Bischoff's book, Looking In.
I don't know nothing about running a $10 business, never mind a multi-billion-dollar business. So now, I want to get into the book because you have a book that's out. Did you self-publish or is that published? Is that not self-published, but
it was actually published through a company called Redwood Publishing in Irvine, California.
Okay, can people get that? Because I'm reading. I'm in the middle. I'm not in the middle of reading it. I read very slow. I'm
like at the end of chapter 1, probably.
Yes, I'm right around there.
If he says he's on chapter 2, he's on the first word of chapter 2.
But okay. I am reading it and I'm enjoying it because it's about a journey. It's not necessarily about your wrestling journey, but it's about another journey that you've gone on.
Oh, it's way more. It's about wrestling, but it's about a lot more. Like the book picks up in 2018 when I was in a really, really dark place in my life. Things were so bad in my life, and I knew things had to change or something bad was going to happen. And I ended up jumping on my Harley Davidson, and I drove down deep into the mountains of Virginia to look up my childhood hero, a wrestler that you will know by the name of Handsome Jimmy, the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. And when I got down to Virginia and found Boogie, we were strangers. He didn't even know me. He didn't know anything about me. And he's like a second father to me now, this guy. He really helped me. I was in a bad, bad place. And that was the beginning of my real journey. Of the book is called Waking Up, and it's really when I woke up, when Boogie started telling me his philosophy of life. And then I jumped on a plane and I flew to Australia, and I looked up and became friends with the singer from my favorite band, Electric Mary, this guy named Rusty Brown. He's a very famous rock star in Australia, and I went on tour with Australia with Electric Mary, and I was introducing them on stage in big cities around Australia. And that was this journey that I went on to try to find some inner peace and be happy again. I was always dealing with addiction and drugs and alcohol and rage and having a really bad temper and just all this stuff. And I got divorced, and I was and my mom died, and it was just all this stuff that happened. And then I discovered yoga. And when I discovered yoga, that changed a lot. All this stuff I'm mentioning were all little pieces of my journey, and it all comes to a head in the end. And the book has a really good ending and a really good message. I get a lot of messages from people that are strangers to me, thanking me for writing the book and telling me they experienced a lot of the same things. I was suicidal, man. I was really in a bad place.
I think that's something that we talk a lot about here. I think me and Josh have both been at that point at times in our lives.
Yeah.
And, got through it in our own ways. So I love mental health awareness is something that we're huge on.
Yeah. It's one of especially I love yoga. Like it's one of those things that my body's finally to a point now, like you, where I've taken enough time to let it heal. Now I can actually start doing a little bit more, and like I've got the DDP yoga, I've got all that stuff, and and I know what to do. It's just that behavior modification, right? That habit, that inner peace, finding yourself. Because once you get out of that, you're right. Like once you get outside of yourself and you start, for me, when I start letting the outside affect me on the inside, is when that snowballs for me. So I absolutely get it and that's why I'm excited to read it once JP gets done. I really am, because it's a familiar journey for me, and like the struggle with mental health as like I'm what they would say is I'm med resistant to SSRIs or anything that would help with depression. So really my thing is diet, exercise, talk therapy, whatever that is. But yeah,
you're on the path, brother. You're totally on the path. That's it. The medication's not going to do anything compared to the stuff that you just mentioned.
And that's the hardest part, is that once you don't know that you need to make that breakthrough until you finally just decide to make that call, talk to the doc, and go through the door. Like those are the three hardest things I think for men to do, because of the stigmatism, fear, judgment. You're weak, like those things. I had to really throw to the side. Growing up in Montana, I mean, you got to be tough. Boston, you got to be tough. Like this is you suck it up. You don't cry. Excuse me. You shut the fuck up and get over it. Like that's what you got to do. But in the end, if you don't process it and you don't have the time to grieve, or for me personally, that irritability, the anger, the frustration, like it was constant. Like it was always there, no matter what. Didn't matter who you were around, what they were saying. Like it could be nothing. They could be doing the nicest thing for you, but you're still irritated because they're doing something nice. Like at that level. So, and I'm super excited to read it, and I'm happy you're where you're at. It's cool.
Now, did you just start doing yoga in 2018?
No, my first yoga class in 2014, I was finishing up like a 30-year run in the gym, and my body was not able to do what it used to do. And so a friend asked me if I was interested in going to a yoga studio that opened up in town. I live in Rhode Island, and it was down here in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, called Rhode Island Power Yoga. So I went to the first class, and it was heated power yoga. It was like 100 degrees in the room. My head was pounding. I was surrounded by all these elite yoga athletes, all these yogis, and I got through it, and that's been my yoga home ever since. Since then, I've traveled all over the world, going to yoga studios, and the journey started there in 2014, and then I found that I could do things with my body now that I never could do when I was wrestling. I mean, I'm doing headstands and handstands in my 50s.
You can't fake the pictures that are in your book on what you're doing as far as the yoga. It's incredible. Like I don't know if I could ever imagine of doing a headstand, never mind like the bends and all of that go with it. I mean, that's the first thing that's holding you back, that thought. Like you definitely could. Anybody can, you really can. It's really, a lot of it is up here, and Josh was alluding to it a few minutes ago, but I can tell you that practicing yoga is like the best thing that I ever did, and I recommend it to anyone.
It took me a long time to learn beginner level meditation, to where I could sit in a spot for 10 minutes and just like disappear, and not, I could, there's Paw Patrol in the back, or there's kids laughing or yelling, or there's a funny joke on the television and somebody laughs next to you. It's a discipline. It took me a long time, even as a Marine. Like I was a former Marine, and I have oppositional defiant disorder. Like I don't give a shit who you are. I'm going to tell you to piss off, and no, I'm not doing it, and whatever. Even if I should do it, I know I should do it. I'm going to tell you that before I do it. So it's taught me calm, right? And it has taught me that control part, right? Like I'm in control of the hardware that's inside me now. Like I can plug software in. It's not really it sounds like Matrix shit, but that's what it feels like. Is like I have the ability to decide what I do and what I don't want to do. I'm in control of that, and yoga helped me figure that out. It introduced me to that meditation part that was missing because the outside distractions were always coming in. That's how it always felt for me.
No, Knuckles, one I definitely want to touch on real quick. Where can people get the book?
The book's available on Amazon.
Okay.
And can you mention the title of the book again? So that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, the book is called Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat.
When you say JP, do you have a follow up to that, or am I?
No, I was just saying it right along with them.
Like when you say you discovered yoga, like how can you tell? I'm sure that's probably in the book, and I don't want you to go too in depth into it, but can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, I just did. A friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go to a yoga class, and I went, and it was as simple as that.
That's just it. I mean, it
jumped right in.
That's that's what mine was.
When I walked into the class, at the beginning, I was planning my escape. I was like, what have I done? It's like 100 degrees. I was sweating profusely. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. The weight room was looking real good again. And then I started to pick up on what was going on around me. And then I just kept going back and going back and going back. I still practice yoga all the time, like 3, 4, 5 times a week.
Do you still do the hot works yoga? Do you still do that?
That's the yoga that I do. That's what I do exclusively. I mean, I will do a yoga class if there's no heat, but I've jumped on my Harley and gone from Rhode Island all the way down to Key West and stopped at yoga studios all along the way and all the way back. And sometimes they don't have heated yoga in the area where I might be staying. So, I'll do whatever's available.
So you got to the point where you actually prefer the heated yoga?
Yeah. I'm in there all the time.
It makes me nauseous just thinking about that right now.
I mean, like you said, I believe I can do it. It's just asserting myself and getting up off of my my keister to do it and getting that ambition. But like the heated yoga, I think would almost intimidate me.
Well, here's the thing about the whole deal with the heat. The reason they make those conditions the way they are in the room is it's all about mindfulness. It's all about, oh my God, it's so hot in here. I used to stand in the class in the beginning and go, it's so hot in here, and say it right out loud. How can you people stand here? It's so hot. And then I realized that's just a thought. That's just a thought that I'm telling myself. It's too hot in here. I can't do it. That's a lie I'm telling myself. It's not true. So then they teach you how to breathe. And in each breath, I can maintain it for just one breath. I can stay in there for a breath. And then that turns into another one and another one. And then I started to realize it's not too hot in here for me. That's just something I'm telling myself.
It's like when the Native Americans used to have a sweat, JP, and they would take the stones in there and they would do it for hours. It's that type of suffering. You just have to get through it.
Mind over matter, right?
Yes.
Hey, TIW Mafia, it's the Yeti. I want to take a minute here real quick and talk about today's podcast. Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo in your podcast. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co. And be sure to add our podcast in the How Did You Hear About Us Podgo section application.
I want to go back into the wrestling. Now, I want to talk, because I've seen you, I know, like I said, I saw you at the Tony Rumble Memorial, and then, unfortunately, after that, I also saw you at, just after Nick Steele had passed away, at that show.
Okay.
That Top Rope had done. Do you go to a lot of the independent shows, or do you go to independent shows?
Yes, it's occasionally. I wouldn't say a lot, but occasionally. And the reason I was at that show that night, I was going to be at that show anyway because I was going to see Nick. I was going to visit Nick. And when he died, there were two people within wrestling, not in my life, but within wrestling, that passed away that I was just totally, totally in shock. The one was Tony Rumble, and the other one was Nick Steele. And when I found out Nick was wrestling that day in New Bedford, I said to a friend of mine, let's go up and I want you to, because me and Nick were tag team partners. We were a tag team called the Dark Side back in the early 90s. He was Nightmare Nick Steele. I was Terror Tully McShane. And Nick was like, we wore these big chains around our neck. And our ring music was A Touch of Evil by Judas Priest. And we came out to the ring and Nick was 16 years old. I was 29. He was 16, and this kid was like light years ahead of his time. So
Yeah.
he knew like tag team wrestling. He taught me so much at such a young age. So I was going to that show anyway that night, and then it turned out to be a memorial show. And I'm trying to think. Silvano Souza was there.
Yeah.
Matt Haven was there. Rich Palladino was there. There were a lot of people from different eras and different spots in the wrestling community that all showed up. Myself, we were all there to pay tribute to such a great kid.
He had he was really young. I only had the opportunity to meet Nick maybe a handful of times. I can't really say I was friends with him or I knew him the way you guys were. But it meant enough to me to go from Quincy, Mass to Fall River to see a show that I wouldn't have necessarily gone to anyway, because I knew there was going to be something for him there.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, like Silvano Souza, a legend. It meant enough for him to go there. And Nick was light years ahead. Like he was a young kid when he was teaching people how to do it, and he was never afraid to take someone under their wing. So.
Well, Silvano Souza used to run amazing, top-notch shows when he was back in the 90s. I believe it was called AWF, American Wrestling Federation. I might be wrong, but it was AWF. And, every single wrestler on his shows were, like, excellent wrestlers. Like, I remember being there, and Tim McNeely would be there, Steve Bradley. And he'd always round them out with wrestlers from television too. He ran great shows, Souza.
Yeah, I never had the opportunity to go. I've met Silvano once or twice, just from being at shows and whatnot. But who is your favorite on the independents now? Do you have one? Do you see somebody that you say, all right, this kid has it. This kid has what it's going to take?
There's quite a few. Like that night in Fall River, I was impressed with Nico Silva.
Oh yeah, Nico's incredible.
Yeah, and I also have a friend who was a former student of mine, because I had a wrestling school years ago in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, called the Combat Zone Pro Wrestling School, and a kid by the name of Joe Moakley started running shows up in Newburyport, AWF, and he's got a lot of good young talent that work for him too.
Yeah, they put on a really good product. They're running it. They have a show. I don't know the date, so I don't want to really I don't want to screw that up. But I know they have a show coming up, and it's going to be the first one in a long time.
Yep, they're getting ready to start up again.
It's now you running Salisbury. That was like a legendary location. I know I use legendary too much on the show, but I mean Salisbury, Mass, like that had some great shows out of there, right?
Well, before my time, there was a building called the Frolics, and that's where the WWF used to go. And Jimmy Valiant told me about the Valiant brothers, and the WWF. That was one of their stops in Salisbury. But if you fast forward from the 70s to the 90s, there was a place called Champs Arena. And Champs Arena was run by a guy named Big City Mike, Rick Martello. And Champs Arena, and I write about this in my book, it sat right in the middle of the center in Salisbury Beach. And it had the potential to be a gold mine. But there was just so many tourists and so many people walking around on the beach. And they did okay for a while, and then the place closed down. And then I ended up living up there and staying up there in Salisbury for 9 years. I ended up liking the area and staying up there. And I brought wrestling back. We did one show for Pop Warner football, and we drew 1,000 people. And I realized that we could do something up here. So I bought a ring. I cover all this in my book too. I didn't really. I mean, my wrestling career was over as far as me trying to make it. So I transitioned into helping other guys make it, and I really found that to be something I enjoyed more than being a wrestler. I loved being a trainer. I loved being a promoter. I loved giving all these guys chances. I mean, I had like Slick Wagner Brown and Louis Ortiz and Eddie Edwards and Nicky Rocks and Velvet Sky and Dylan Cage and Ron Zombie and Astro Man. I could just go on and on. Fred the Rocket Curry. I had all the top independent wrestlers in New England at the time, and we did a television show called This Week in Wrestling that was hosted by Brian Webster, and the show just did 102 weeks of we did 102 weeks of TV. We ran shows bi-monthly, and it was a hell of a run for about 2 years.
That's you just named literally some of those guys are still the top talent in New England now.
Oh yeah,
guys like Slick and so that and Eddie and and that was going back, and they were the top guys then too. It's funny how.
I wouldn't say they were the top guys then. I would say Eddie Edwards was a young kid. I would say Slick was just coming into his own. Zombie and Dylan Cage and Fred Curry, those guys were like in their prime. Fred Curry is the wrestler that I always thought should have made it big. For some reason, it didn't really happen, but he was so talented. And so, but there was we had a great run at Wrestling Star Wars was the name of the promotion, and it was in tribute to World Class Championship Wrestling, which was my favorite organization as a kid growing up.
WCCW.
Yes.
Now, other than the Boogie Woogie Man, other than Handsome One, who else did you look up to as a kid? Like, was it just the Valiant that sort of inspired you to get into it?
No, not at all. But when I think back to the wrestlers that influenced me, I was heavily influenced by Adrian Adonis before the whole Adorable Adrian thing. When he was. Well, even before the East-West connection, like when he was with a black leather jacket, that guy was ahead of his time. He was such an amazing wrestler. I was also heavily, heavily influenced by the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. When I saw those guys come along, they were just doing something different. Those guys, I just was sure it was real. They were just punching each other in the face and kicking each other. It was like, this is not like, WWF. It just seemed like they were just really going at it, and I also was a big, Ric Flair, Bruiser Brody, Superstar Billy Graham. I have my favorites. Midnight Express.
So for the most part, like the guys you named, like the Bruiser Brodies, like the guys that sort of legitimized it, I'd say, like made it look. You thought you were watching a fight, not a wrestling match.
Yeah, here's one example. Like, if you take any of the cookie cutter wrestlers of today, and I'm not putting down anyone in wrestling today, but a lot of the guys are the same. They're just, they all look like male models. They're all, millennials. And if you took Terry Gordy in his heyday and put him in the ring against any one of these kids, they wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in South Boston. I've been in my share of fist fights. I've seen a fist fight. And then I'm not putting down because these guys are doing stuff I cannot do. I don't have the athletic ability. I don't have the agility. I'm making up excuses on why I can't do something, and I understand that, but they're doing stuff I cannot do. But sometimes it doesn't make sense.
I guess for me is I would want.
I love what they do.
If I was to do this right, if I was to have the ability to do this, I didn't live in BFE in Montana, and we actually had a promotion or probably a ring somewhere in the state. Like I think it would just be exhausting. Like it would just be not to the point where. Just understand, when you mentioned Ric Flair, I think about how he trained and how he wanted to give up and how he just he quit and then he quit again, and then he figured it out, and I think that's kind of where it's at is like these kids don't necessarily have the time to go through that or aren't given the opportunity to suffer and know what it feels like to have that. So I guess for me, if I was going to do that, I want to be in the ring with somebody that was going to kick the shit out of me and bring it out of me. Like I would want that. I would make sure, if I was going to be, I would want to be Chris Dickinson right now. If I was to do it all over again, I would be Chris Dickinson right now. I would be that kid.
Now, we touched on a lot of names, and a lot of names that I wanted to talk about. There was one we haven't touched on yet that I know is near and dear to you, and that's a radio personality down in Virginia, Jeff Katz.
Yeah, Jeff's my best friend.
That's did that come from wrestling? Because I know he was a big part of wrestling up here for a long time.
Yeah, well, that's where we met in the Century Wrestling Alliance, which morphed into the NWA, New England territory. But back then, we really only knew each other from working on wrestling shows together. And I was so out of control. Jeff would not have been out with me at night with the shit that I was doing. And
right.
But years later, when social media came along, I found Jeff on this thing called MySpace, and me and Jeff reconnected, and our friendship, and I found out because he back in the '90s he left Boston and he went out to Vegas for a radio gig, and I lost touch with him after that, and then in 2004. We reconnected, and he was married with 3 kids, and we started spending time together. And now I go down to Virginia 2 or 3 times a year to see him and to see Boogie. And he's also a huge part of Boogie's Wrestling Camp, which I should also plug if you guys aren't aware of it. Boogie's Wrestling Camp Hall of Fame and Museum in Charlotte, Virginia. If you haven't been there, and I know it's not exactly close, but it's only an 8-hour ride from Massachusetts. It's filled with wrestling nostalgia and memorabilia and all these different things. And there's also wrestling school and practice going on. And you never know who's going to be there when, like I was there one time and Ricky Martin was there. And, you just never know who's going to pop in there. And whenever I go to Virginia, I go to Richmond first and get Jeff. And then me and Jeff go down to see Boogie. In fact, while we're here talking about it, I've got my Jeff Katz Show mug right here, guys.
There you go.
WRBA in Richmond. He is on from 3 to 6 every day. He's got the #1 rated show in Virginia. In Richmond, I mean.
Now, I also wanted to talk.
That's a big thing.
Like, me and you had never met before. Like I said, we've been in the same room, but we've never officially met other than this. And I've heard a lot about you through the years, never really anything bad. Just that you were like a tough dude who you didn't want to mess with. And like you were the type of guy who I think people try to stay out of the way from. And it seems like now you're putting yourself into the middle of situations where you're meeting new people and you're kind of putting yourself out there. One, it's selling the book, but 2, I think has the yoga and that type of thing kind of transformed you, do you think?
Yeah, I think I've been sober for almost 20 years, and like that had a lot to do with it. Like I was like bad with drugs and alcohol most of my teens, 20s, and 30s. Okay. And I also think the name of my book is called Waking Up because I actually did wake up. I had like a really huge spiritual awakening, and it's not like I'm in church or anything like that, but I just am totally connected with the universe. And once I wrote this book, and you said you were in the early stages of it, as it goes on, people have told me they're picking their jaw up off the ground when they are reading it, because I am as honest as I've ever been in my life. And when you do that, when you put that all on paper and you put it out there to anyone to read it, I'm free. I'm totally free. There's nothing I have to worry about anyone finding out about me. All my secrets are out there. And I actually work. I have a job. I'm a driver for the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, and I'm a bus driver. And people in work are just like, no one knew anything about that. They didn't know who Knuckles Nelson was. They didn't know anything about that. How come we didn't know any of this about you? And I was like, well, like now they're reading about, like crazy drug use and alcohol and crazy wild partying all over the world, and stuff. But so I don't have any secrets. And I think if I mean it, I don't have any secrets, nothing, zero, none. So when you have them, when I had them, I should say, it was different. Like I was guarded, and I'm not anymore. And so I think the combination of yoga and having a spiritual awakening and putting it all down in a book and all that stuff has made me very accessible and very open. And people, like they see a different, some of my friends call me Yoga Nux.
Nice.
Yoga Nux.
So would you say that and not to go too far, but it might be fourth wall. Speaking of four, would you say this was like a fourth step for you? Like, is that what the book could be compared to? Are you none of that, or this is more of a
Definitely,
just
definitely. It's a 370 page fourth step. Yes.
yeah,
That's
awesome.
one large step, huh?
Yes.
Now, what made you write the book? I'm trying to figure out how to word that, but what brought you to write the book and just know that people would be interested in buying it?
Well, when I was coming back from my first initial trip to Boogie's Wrestling Camp, I was on my motorcycle, and Jeff Katz and his oldest son Harry were in a car in front of me because I needed to arrive there on a motorcycle because Boogie's a biker. When we were driving from Shoresville back to Richmond, I started thinking something. I was like, something was like brewing in my head. I didn't really even know what it was. And we went, and so when I got back to Richmond, I spent about a week there. And every day, Jeff showed me around Richmond and showed me all over the place. Everything. I knew Richmond like the back of my hand by the time I left. And one day he said to me, would you be interested in going to the Virginia War Memorial tonight to listen to a guy speak? And I didn't know who he was or what it was about. And I said, sure, I'll go. So the guy's name was Craig Rossi, and we went to this Virginia War Memorial, and it was an auditorium full of people. And Craig was up on stage with a slideshow, and he's showing all these slides of him in Afghanistan. His book is called Fred and Craig, a Marine, a stray dog, and how they saved each other. This book, he wrote a book, and it's about how he smuggled a dog from Afghanistan back to the United States. And this book is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And he's like, it's an incredible story. He said, I'm a Marine. I'm a grunt. I never thought about writing a book. And now he's got like this really his book is phenomenal. I highly recommend it. It's called Fred and Craig, a Marine, a stray dog, and how they saved each other. And I sat there and I was like, I'm going to write a book too. It was in that moment that I knew I was going to write a book. And I came home and I sat down with composition notebooks like you had in school, and I just started filling them up. I filled 6 of them up. I filled 6. I drained 4 pens. I just wrote and wrote. And I knew, this is going to be a book someday, and it was.
It's got me reading, which Josh will tell you is a venture. I have a couple other books here that I was supposed to start, and I said, nope, I'm reading Knuckles first.
I appreciate that.
Because the other books have been honestly sitting for about a month unopened. Yeah. And yours, the day I got it, I messaged you, and I started reading it right away. And that was
my first question was, it's not an audiobook, so you can't listen to it.
No, you have to sound out some of the words, but I'm getting them. But
there's some pretty cool old wrestling photos in there too.
Yeah,
some unique photos that I took, so that that they're not like.
You can openly shame him and guilt him to not reading it. I mean, he's had an opportune time to get this completed. He's absolutely had the opportune time to get it done.
I can't stand you because you know what my life has been.
just having me on the show is enough for me.
So Amazon.com, and the book's readily available. It's a great read.
That's JP's dig telling me to go buy it and read it, is what he's saying right now.
No, I will send it to you.
I'm going to go do it.
You'll have it within a month.
So when the book came out, listen to this, guys. The book was released on February 11th, and there was no way that the publishing company had any way of knowing that that's my mom's birthday.
Oh, wow. Right? That's really cool.
And she died a very tragic accident, like in 2014. It was really horrible. But when they said to me, how about we release it on February 11th? I was like, what? I was like, how you just can't make this shit up. And the book went to #1 on Amazon for new releases in wrestling, and I knocked off the Bella Twins. It was like, take that, Bella Twins.
Hall of Fame. What?
Knuckles is a Hall of Famer too. So
That's right.
And that was Joe Bruin, who Joe Bruin reached out to me and said, hey, why don't you have Knuckle Nelson on the show? And you're someone who, I've always thought about hitting up, but like I said, you had sort of an intimidating reputation, and I knew you were out of the business. I saw you did Leo Connor's show, so then I was like, thinking about it. And then when Joe hit me up, I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to reach out to him.
I'm so glad.
So thank you, Joe. I love Joe. Joe, and what he does for New England wrestling is unbelievable.
That's a whole other show. Joe is the man.
Do you feel we got like 7 minutes left, and I want to follow up to the answer that you just you spoke about, like how your mom's birthday in February 11th. Like when you started to get the clarity, do you really feel like you just, I'm gonna do that, and then you did it, and then I'm gonna do that, and then I did it? Do you feel like once you figured that part out that you were able to, like, just things just started to happen? Not necessarily that you weren't pushing any harder, you weren't doing anything more. Your attitude and your presentation and your thought process as far as reframing that. Do you feel like that led to and put you to where you're at now?
Well, I would love to be on a long car ride with you, Josh. I like you and me are on the same wavelength, dude. We really are. Like, what you just said is totally true, and not only in the writing aspect of it, but you mentioned the fourth step. It was like writing a fourth step, and the things that came out of the writing process were incredible. While I was writing this book, 3 different people that I hadn't talked to in 20 years reached out to me out of the clear blue. And I was able to reconnect with all 3 of them. I owed all of them an apology, no doubt about that. And I was able to repair all these relationships and like just all the stuff. Like, yes, a channel like to the universe opened up for me. And you know, the book that Jay was just holding up, it came out of it. And that's me on the cover doing a headstand at the Newport Cliff Walks in Newport, Rhode Island.
And I've looked at this picture over and over, guys. There are no cables. There's no wires there. He's actually doing that headstand.
Yeah. No, and there were all these. There was all these little.
Back, look at that.
That's all crow pose. I'm doing crow pose in the back, but on the one on the front, there were all these little rocks on the ground, and they were all digging into my head. I was saying to the photographer, hurry up, get this shot."
That is a really cool shot, though.
It is. It's awesome. And I guess the reason I asked that question is it seems like the more JP and I continue to do good things for people, the more that connection to the universe that you talk about happens for us. Things just happen for us. And, you know, again, that part of it, like the reconnection part, it's so odd for me to listen to you say that because for me, it's the same thing. And I don't know, I can't remember the quote that Timber always said. I think it's the furthest 18 inches you'll travel is from your head to your heart. And like, to me, that's the hardest part is like, I'll run a marathon. I'll do whatever you need to do. But it's that head to heart connection that I think a lot of us forget about. And it's really cool. And I'm really looking forward to, one, the fact that your pro wrestling history, for that, and then 2, like the yoga journey and that part and the introspection, I think has a lot to add to a generation of kids out there that probably need it. And the fact that you're trained by Bob Evans just tells me that you're more than willing to share it.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
What you created, like Knuckles Nelson, the name in New England, like I said, is very like legendary among the wrestling. And then the Brotherhood on top of that is like a legend in its own right. And that's a tag team. That's a stable name that continues to be talked about, and that people have tried to rekindle over the years, and it just didn't have the same flame. So that, to me, as a fan, just says what you were able to do with Eric Sprazier, Tony Rumble, and those guys with the Brotherhood. So,
well, if I could, when you mentioned legendary, and I appreciate you saying that, but I would like to give you a few of what I consider the legendary wrestlers from New England, from my area.
Please.
Yes.
Gorgeous Chris Duffy, Brian Walsh, Tim McNeely, Brittany Brown, these people, John Cronus, Perry Saturn, Triple H. These guys are the real, Matt Bloom are the real legends. Right now, you have Triple H in the position that he is in WWE, and Matt Bloom, the head trainer at the Performance Center. These guys are from Killer Kowalski's wrestling school in Malden, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
These guys are Killer's philosophy is being trained down there in Orlando right now. It's being passed on and infused into any single person that comes through there. And those are the legends of New England. Those guys right there.
I know you're humble, and I know that's what it is. But to me, as a wrestling fan that came up in New England, as a New England wrestling fan, your name is in there with them. Your name is absolutely in there with Brittany Brown. And
Jay, there's one more I have to add too, the Boston bad boy, Tony Rumble.
Yes. So I never met Tony, not once in my life. And I remember the day I read on onewrestling.com that he passed away, and that affected me. So I can only imagine how it affected the people he got to meet and know. And like, I've become friends with a lot of those guys. So
do we have time for one more quick story?
Absolutely.
I'm in the airport, in John Wayne Airport in LA, and back then I didn't have a cell phone. Nobody had cell phones yet. And I picked up a phone, a pay phone, and I called my answering machine, and Jeff Katz was on the machine letting me know that Tony Rumble had died. And I was in total shock. I turned my back to the wall and I slid down to the floor. All these sets of legs were going by me in the airport, going back and forth, and I still had to catch my flight. And I got over to where the you go through the X-ray machine, and there were 3 pairs of brass knuckles in my my bag, because I had driven across the country. I had driven across, and I was going to fly back. So the state police in California, CHIPS is around me now, and they're like, this is a felony. You have 3 pairs of brass knuckles here. And I explained to them who I was, and I opened up my bag, and it smelled like a wrestling locker room. So that helped. And they said, listen, here's the deal. We're going to let you catch your flight back to Boston, but we're going to keep the brass knuckles. So how ironic was it that the moment I found out Tony Rumble died, the brass knuckles were taken from me, and he was the guy that gave me that whole gimmick. It's just crazy, right?
Yeah, I believe strongly in signs. I've seen way too many for me not to, and I think other people can believe what they believe. But yeah, that's that was definitely something from Tony, I would say.
Yeah. It's always humbling for me when I get an opportunity to talk to somebody that's part of pro wrestling history. So I want to say thanks for taking the time and hanging out with us tonight for sure.
Guys, get the book, Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat. Where can they find, like, you're Amazon. An author now, so you're back in the limelight. You're back at, you're an author now. Do you have social media that like fans can look for you on?
Yeah, there's a Waking Up Facebook page. There's a Waking Up Instagram page. And, also there's a Knuckles Nelson page. And also my real name is Brendan Higgins. And, anybody can reach out anytime they want, especially people that are dealing with things like suicidal thoughts, drugs and alcohol, extreme anger and rage, all that stuff. Because you'll be hearing it from a guy that is Boston born and Boston bred. And I'll be Boston bad till I'm Boston dead.
Love it. Love it. Josh, if you don't know, that was Tony Rumble right there.
Yeah.
That's how Tony ended every promo, and that's how Tony lived his life, from what I understand. So I love that. That just
is it kind of like my flag? Is it kind of like my flag, Montana till I die?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Knuckles, thank you so much, guys. Get the book, Waking Up from the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat. I'm going to show it for the people that watch the video on YouTube. On Amazon. Brendan Higgins is the author, if that's easier to search by, but get the book, look him up on YouTube. Like, there's some old NWA New England stuff on YouTube, CWA and all of that stuff. It's just great wrestling. Like, that whole era of wrestling is like, that's my jam. That's where I grew up. That's where I love it. And, Knuckles, it means a ton that you did this with us, so I appreciate that. And anytime you want to come on, anytime you want to push the book, just let us know, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, guys. The pleasure was all mine. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I spend too much time on Gaia. That's why I'm with you. Like I'm with you. I spend too much time there.
I didn't just love that you did the Tony Rumble sign off. I love what you said before that about the anyone going through the dark times, because that's something that we've been preaching for a couple of years now. Reach out to us, reach out to Brendan, reach out to Knuckles. Any one of the three of us, I can guarantee will respond to you.
Oh, there's a lot of answers to that stuff in my book. There really are.
That's